Welcome to episode 11 of Devdecoder, and I'm feeling particularly proud of myself today.
Is it not episode 10?
Nope, you weren't here for episode 10.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know why I'm feeling particularly proud of myself?
Because you're putting up with me.
Yep.
Is that right?
You've been back for about 5 hours, and I've so far managed not to jump out the window or do anything else. So I'm feeling really proud of myself.
I'm proud of yourself as well.
You're proud of your... That doesn't make any sense.
I'm proud of yourself. Have you seen... Why are you smiling like that? It's scaring me.
Because I'm expecting something really interesting.
Have you seen anything about British Airways in the news?
No,
I
think I have.
Oh, this is a first. So apparently British Airways have been asking people on Twitter to reply to their thread with all the contact details. So to comply with GDPR. So there's one tweet where it says, can you send us your passport number, contact name, date of birth, place of birth, like all the information. They've asked people to reply to the thread, and some people have actually done it.
This is you're God making this up.
No, honestly. And then I think about a few hours later, somebody called them out on it, and then they somehow edited the tweets to say direct messages and told everyone to delete the tweets that they put all the information in.
Because, you can just delete tweets and they'll never appear again on the internet. Because people don't actually grab them all the time. People
have actually done it. People have actually put their personal information on Twitter for 4 digits of the card that they paid with. So
Rebecca, I feel compelled to ask this. You didn't reply to that thread, did you?
I don't fly with British Airways.
I kind of fell out with British Airways anyway.
Have you? Why?
Well, I actually tried to sue them because they lost all my luggage. Turns out I didn't have a case. Come on! Are you actually serious? This actually happened?
Yeah, seriously. You can look it up on Twitter.
This is just horrifying.
And then they did something else. So apparently... if you put in your personal details in to check in, somebody found out that they actually share that information with third party.
Yeah.
So all your personal information that you check in with, so like Twitter, I think I can't remember what it was called, like Double Click or something like that.
Yeah, they're an advertising agency, yeah.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because GDPR legislation has really been untested so far. And they're looking, I think the Data Protection Agency are going to be looking for test cases. And people like, companies like British Airways are a prime target. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of action is taken against them for that. Ultimately, they haven't actually been the ones that shared the information. So it's going to be an interesting test case because just because you go
Well, they asked them to.
Well, yeah, but ultimately you can ask... it's not against GDPR to ask somebody to put... I could ask you to go and paste your details all over Twitter, but that doesn't make me liable for you actually being idiotic enough to paste your details over Twitter. And plus, you've not shared it on my platform, you put it on Twitter's platform. But
then you could say, for people that don't understand GDPR, they might have believed it
it's
and
pretty
thought
much everybody.
to...
Yeah. Well, GDPR is just been an absolute mess of legislation.
If you're like a student, though, and you don't work, then would you understand? Would you even look at what GDPR is? Would you even be bothered with it?
I think it's not really relevant that this is to do with GDPR, etc. I think what's really relevant about this story, assuming it's true, because it's almost unbelievably really, but assuming it is true, it just does go to highlight just how ignorant some people are of their own privacy and the implications of that. And just this is why phishing works. This is why some of the attacks do work, because you don't need everybody to fall for a scam. When you're hitting 1 million people, you need a tiny percentage of it just to get paid out. And I think this is the problem, is that we need much better education of people to understand just the implications of sharing your personal details online. You should just not be doing that. Okay, well, I thought I'd do something a little bit different this week, and we would talk to somebody that it's your last day.
This is correct. Blink twice if you're under duress.
So do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Jack. I am soon to be the former head of marketing at Web Applications UK.
And where are you going?
I'm leaving the company to pursue a career in policing.
I felt that, as this is your last day, you've obviously been here for quite some time, I think 4 years.
Yeah, 4 and a bit. About a lot of months, many months.
So I thought over that time you've probably gained some insights or some things having been in this culture. Because obviously being in marketing, you're not necessarily in IT, but you've come in as somebody into the IT industry and had a real, you've had a lot of exposure to the IT industry over the last 4.5 years. And I thought you might have some reflections or insights on what you've learned over that time and what it's like to be in this industry, and maybe even some tips for people who've never been in the industry and are thinking about getting involved.
Tech it's a funny little industry because it's there's a lot of microcosms in it. There's a lot of little cliques, and not cliques, but there's a lot of sort of segments to it, and it's very sort of multifaceted. But one of the things that kind of binds it together and that makes it always kind of very familiar, I guess, within all the different little sects of it. It's a community. It's very community based as an industry. And it's easy to say that about industries, I guess. But for me in tech, that's something I've always kind of experienced, whether it's working with the hackathons, whether it's going out to schools, doing the code club stuff, which mainly try to get out of, as Rebecca can attest to. Not much of a people person, given that I work in marketing. But I've always tried to be behind the scenes. But I think for me, it's defined by a sense of community. It's been a big part in me trying to dig deep and work out where I want to go in the future, really.
Did you always intend to get into tech?
No, there was never an intention to get into tech. I was tech savvy at school in the way that sort of millennial children are. So I knew how to use teletext when I was a kid. I was always the one that fixed the Sky and fixed the computer and stuff. Fixed as in cleared the history for your parents or whatever it was they wanted doing. So there's always that tech savviness when you're growing up, but there was never a real intention to go into IT. It just kind of fell into my lap a little bit, but it was not something I regretted. It's something that resonated with me straight away because of that kind of savviness that I had as a kid, I guess. It's just one of those things. It resonates with me as a person. There's a lot of like meme culture, I guess, that kind of is part of who I am. Bit of a troll on down low.
Is there anything that you found particularly surprising about this industry?
But I think for me, the thought that goes into things and also the level of, I guess, how much certain companies care about their employees. Certainly Webapps puts a lot of effort into ensuring a great company culture and all that sort of stuff, which has been a big part of what we do in the marketing team over the years. And I didn't expect that. I think looking at it objectively and giving it some actual thought, you probably could have picked up on that. And most people listening or watching or whatever context this appears in, this know that anyway, probably. If they know about tech, that's the way it is. But as an outsider, that's one thing I picked up on straight away. It's an industry where you cared about, and that's made known.
So obviously, now that you're going to join the police and stuff, is there any lessons that you would take out of being in the tech industry into that new career?
I don't know. I think one of the things about tech is that it is very community orientated. So it's certainly been an inspiration to me, and it's been a big part of why I've kind of looked into going into, I guess, public service. Not technically work for the Queen, not the public, but let's not go into that. I think just the care and some of the empathy I've come across through my time here, and just that whole idea of growth and development, I think as well. That's very common. It's a bit of a lip service thing they do in the public sector, but I think that it's something that I've taken with me, and it's something that I'll try and actually champion a little bit as I go forward. Thinking about things like continuous professional development, just being a nice person as well, which isn't something I'd thought about generally. I think as a person, I'm a lot more compassionate, and I don't know what you can blame that on. Maybe it's just getting older, I don't know. Hairline certainly got a lot worse while I've been here, but I think compassion's a big one there.
And if someone was thinking about getting into IT, particularly someone who, like you, wasn't really thinking about it originally, what would be the main piece of advice you'd give them?
It's, well, my experience of it, I've met a lot of companies, only worked in one, but I think it's an area that you can go into with an open mind. You can kind of do whatever you want. There's a lot of opportunities, I feel, in IT to just develop organically. It's a very open kind of field. There's no real, to use a cliched, hackneyed term, there's no real glass ceiling in any case. I started as a PR assistant and fashioned a job title as a head of marketing and communications, which is very verbose, but it does the job, I guess. It's come through a kind of progression, but I started out just wanting to write adverts. I ended up becoming an advisor on business communications and all sorts of things, and using my natural talents to help people improve was something that I just ended up doing and found I was good at. So there's no barrier to what you can do, really.
Okay, well, certainly I know that everyone here is going to wish you all the success in the future. We're really excited to see where you're going. It's really nice to see you grow and change and develop yourself, as well as to see the changes happening in the company whilst you've been here, and a lot of that you've had a big impact in. So all the best in the future and good luck.
That's great. It's been a pretty wild ride.
Hi Jack, so hopefully you've got another question today.
I do. Today I was hoping to ask you about, well, last week I asked you about any just general advice for a new developer and how you would.
Yes.
And this week I was asking, and that turned into talking about how you would essentially start a project.
Yes.
This week I was going to ask you about when a project is undergoing and you encounter an issue, do you have any advice for debugging?
Yeah, and you know what? At the risk of sounding very repetitive, the first bit of advice would still be step away from the keyboard.
Yeah.
We have a phrase in the industry called F5 debugging.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of other versions of it. People call it lots of different things. But it's the idea that these days a lot of developers enter the industry and learn to debug by stepping through the code.
Yeah.
And it's a big mistake.
So using the debugging functions in Visual Studio and things like that in order to see this line is doing this.
Yeah, I mean, they're wonderful tools. I can't tell you how, for someone like me, things like Visual Studio over the years, I remember working with Visual Studio, I think first in like 1998, something like that, so 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Thinking, this is amazing. Having an IDE it was mind-blowing. The downside is that you create a generation of developers that have got screwdrivers, and screwdrivers are really cool, but then everything looks like a screw.
Yeah.
So they try to solve everything using the screwdriver. They try to solve everything using the IDE. And actually, it's very slow. And it's also very misleading. You can find yourself looking at a particular problem and stepping through it and saying, there's nothing wrong here. And you're right, there is nothing wrong here. The problem is not in the code. Probably the best way for me to explain this is the way I say to most developers is that code always does what you tell it to. So it's not that the machine is failing to follow the instructions. It's that you've given it the wrong instructions.
Yeah.
And that can be really subtle and pervasive. And the problem is that often when you get into that F5 debugging mindset, you look at the code and you think it's doing what it should do. So what's the problem here? You're not actually thinking about what should it be doing.
I would say that there are a lot of things that do have intricacies to them that might not be initially apparent when you write the code.
Yes.
So that F5 debugging is useful for seeing the output which you don't expect, which might then be handled by something else.
And I definitely would not say that F5 debugging is the bane of our industry and should never be introduced. I don't mean that at all. I mean it's heavily overused.
Yeah.
So here's a good example, and this is one of my bugs actually. I got a phone call once at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was about to head off into work. I'd been doing some work at home, and I was about to come into work, and it was a customer. It was a P1 case. Their website had gone down. The website had gone down and they've been getting these errors. The bookings couldn't be taken anymore. This is one of my bugs, a bug of which I'm highly ashamed of. So I'll use it as a good example. I wasn't at a computer. I was knowing it. Just the customer's there. The website's gone down. And I'm like, why has their website, which has been absolutely solidly reliable for the last about 4 or 5 months, it's been in live at that point, why has it suddenly gone down? And I looked at my watch and it was the 29th of February. And I thought to myself, it's a leap year.
Yeah.
And we've got a date that doesn't make sense. Leap year, date bug. Oh, there's a date bug. Because it's one of the classic issues in IT that leap days always mess you up. And I thought for my code and I was like, when do I ever use the date? When's the date used?
Without knowing anything written in the code, you've gone from it's a leap year, it's probably to do with
dates.
Something's
happened today. It happened it happened early this morning.
Yeah.
On the very first time I tried to make a booking that day. So something's happened about today, right? Because it's something's about today. I looked at the date. Oh, it's one of those weird dates that doesn't happen all the time. All right. Okay. How do we fix this? Right. Well, I thought then about the code. I'd written the code. I knew there was code then. I was like, when have I used dates in this booking process?
And at only that point do you need to know what's actually written in the computer. You already have a good idea of what you're looking for.
Yeah. So I know, I use it for things like the booking dates. I use it for when the holiday date. Well, it's not going to be the holiday date because the holiday date, if it had been something to do with the holiday date,
it wouldn't have been today.
It would have happened before by now. It would have happened at any time for someone booking a holiday that started today or finished today or something like that. Happened today, so it could be the booking date. So I thought of myself, well, do I ever do anything clever with the booking date? And the answer is no. The booking date's always today's date. So there's nothing really clever about the booking date.
So there'd be no reason for it to throw an error because it can handle today's date. It can handle the 29th.
Yeah.
There was no reason for it to throw that error.
It's not that we don't know about today's date. The system, all I'm doing is taking the date and using it. So I'm not really doing anything special with that. So I think, well, what are the dates I use in the system? And then the next one that came to mind was people's ages. So the customer had this requirement where they need to know the customer's their customer's age. right? Because they have
person making the booking.
Yeah, so they have a different price for infants and children and adults, right? Now, I pointed out that age is quite a nebulous concept, because is it the age at the booking? Is it the age at the travel time? Is it the age when the holiday date starts? So, for example, to put this in age perspective, imagine that I have cheaper holidays for people under the age of 18. But when you make the booking, they're under the age of 18. But when the holiday starts, they're now 18. So what age do what age do you store? Age is a bad idea. So the way I designed the system was, well, I'll abstract the problem of age away. So what I'll do is I'll use date of birth. Okay. Now the problem now is you don't want to ask everyone the date of birth, but I'm pushing the problem down the line a little bit. And so I say, well, I assume there's a date of birth. Because there is a date of birth, but I might not know what the date of birth is.
Yeah.
It might be approximately the date of birth. So if the customer doesn't want to ask someone their date of birth, he can ask them, are you an adult, child, or infant and stuff. And then if it doesn't ask them the date of birth, what it can do is it can take today's date and it can add a default number of years to it.
Just a placeholder one to put them in the correct category.
Yeah, and then we'll mark the date as an approximate date of birth. So it's not their actual date of birth, it's approximate date of birth. It's based on when they made the booking and what category they said. And now your system doesn't need to hold date of births, but it could in future hold date of births, and it doesn't need to worry about all kinds of problems with, holiday travel. You're making an assumption, well, if they've said they're going to be the age on the holiday date, then fine, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's still quite useful because, if 10 years from now an infant comes along and tries to book it, you can say, well, they're clearly not still going to be an infant. So you can assume they're an adult. And for half the time you'll be right and half the time you might be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? But at least you're not going to just automatically assume they're an adult, and they can say, well, actually, I'm still an infant. Okay, you can change them back to being an infant by giving them a new date of birth, etc. So this was just a way of solving that. And this came to my mind because immediately I spotted the problem. That was it. It took me all of around about a lot quicker than it's taken to explain it to you now. It took me about 5 seconds from the moment they called to noticing the date, to removing booking date, then to realising that they were using this approximate date. They went in, changed the config, sure enough, the system came back up and was running. So not only did I diagnose the bug, which I'll now explain to you, I also gave them a temporary workaround fix for it, which got them up and live, went in, got into work, changed the one line of code that had that bug in it, and released a patch to them the next day. The point was, no code, no debugging, and if I'd started by F5 debugging, I'd have probably spent most of that day trying to find that bug. Because I wouldn't have found it, because I'd be looking for where does it do this bug. I'd have had to reproduce the system, create all the rest. But the answer was in front of me. The answer was there by just using Occam's razor and cutting it out. And that's a really good example of why best bit of advice I give to debuggers, the same advice I give to everyone, which is why I think it's the best advice for almost everything in terms of development, is step away from the keyboard. Start by asking yourself some important questions. What's going on and how can we fix this? You're listening to Devdecoder podcast. You can subscribe and like us on all the major podcasting platforms and YouTube.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Devdecoder.
You can email us using podcast@devdecoder.com.
Or check out our website at devdecoder.com.
We love hearing from all our listeners, so make sure you get in touch and let us know what you'd like to hear about.
Oh, he's on his phone.
Ha ha. Have you heard of 5? You don't know what I'm talking about.
I do.
5. Have you heard of 5?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you have heard of 5. That's not what I was going to say. What's 5? You're thinking of a band. Yeah, singing up. But that's not what I'm talking about.
I thought he was going to say Fireman Sam.
Nope. I was going to say 5G.
It's one up from 4G.
Well done. What was 4G?
It's internet. Data. Mobile data.
Mobile data. That's good.
Pew,
so
pew.
It's 4th generation mobile data.
Is that what it means? 4th generation?
The G stands for generation. Theoretically, 5G can go somewhere between 1 to 10, and some places in Korea say up to 20 gigabits in speed.
I can never tell the difference though.
Well, on your normal older networks, wired networks at work, your local area networks, the speed of those was often 100 megabit. And still, in a lot of companies, the wiring and everything and the routers and switches are 100 megabit. Over time, most of them have been upgraded to 1 gigabit. And most companies out there are sat on, so your home router at home, if you're on something like BT Infinity, you'll be on potentially 75 megabits. And if you're on Fiber, Virgin, or some of those, you might be up to 200 megabit. The thing that 5G is going to give, theoretically, means that it'll be faster immediately than almost anybody has in their home today. I mean, we as a business, for example, we have a gigabit dedicated leased line, although we rarely actually get full gigabit. We get about 800, 700 megabit. 5G is about 10 to 20 times faster. So normally to go faster, you need a higher frequency, but higher frequencies more easily blocked by buildings and obstacles, and they have a shorter range because of that.
So what happens when you're in like a massive field and you got no signal and no internet?
That's because you're not close enough to a cell, so you're not close enough to a transceiver. But you've probably noticed that when your 4G network disconnects, you can often get a 3G network that's kind of slow, but you can still get it. And the 4G network, the reason for that is because the 4G network, it doesn't travel quite as far. You have to be closer to the transceivers. But what you'll probably notice is that network providers will probably use the 5G rollout initially to boost the reliability of the 4G network. So you'll have more coverage for the 4G. So you'll probably see a lot more investment in 4G still over the next few years. But they start rolling out 5G in hotspots like in city centres and things like that. You'll start seeing much more coverage of 5G. But the reason this is really important, I wanted to mention it, is because 4G is already at the stage where it was comparable almost with home internet, for most home internet. And the reality is that the speed of rolling out home internet connections has been so slow that 5G has a real possibility of outstripping the speed with which home internet can get.
So will the home internet not improve in the future?
It is doing. I think this is the first time where I think it's really possible that what you might see is mobile data actually outstripping the performance of wired data. And that's quite exciting in many respects. It could be as disruptive as, I mean, for example, that's kind of equivalent to, if you go into a lot of people's homes now, they don't have a landline, or they don't use the landline.
Yeah, I don't have a landline.
Very few people use it, even though companies like BT and Openreach force you to have a landline and a telephone number. Most people just don't plug a phone into it and never use it.
I don't have one.
Because the mobiles are just, why would you have a landline when you got a mobile? And people just don't use them. And that's, for the first time ever, there's a chance and a possibility, because of the lack of investment and speed of improvement of the wired networks, that people will move off wired networks entirely and not bother having a wired network. And that can be hugely frightening and disruptive to the ISPs and providers that we have out there now, because you could effectively just, and some people already do this, by the way, some people already have cut the cord entirely in terms of they don't bother with internet at home because they just use their phone.
See, with my contract, I know that wherever I go, say work or home or whatever, or mum and dad's, I'll connect to their Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So I hardly even use any data on my phone unless I'm going somewhere that won't connect to the internet, but that's rare because I don't use my phone in restaurants and stuff or bars. So,
well, I think this is probably, you know, there's all kinds of really good reasons why this might happen. Although technologically, it'd be surprising for one good reason, that it's generally more reliable and faster. You should be able to go faster on a wired connection, particularly an optical connection, fibre, than you could possibly do over the air wirelessly. For all kinds of very good reasons, the technology is easier on the wired. But the cost of putting in a wire, whether that be fibre or copper, the cost of putting that in is prohibitively expensive, because you have to dig up a road and you have to lay that fibre. And the government has just recently announced that it wants to see fibre into people's homes being ubiquitous by 2030.
Yeah.
That's great. And at the moment, fibre only really gives most people's fibre only gets fibre to the cabinet, which is not to the home, and they only get 200 megabits. But actually, fibre should easily, even with current technologies, without massive investment, be able to deliver 10 gigabit. But none of the ISPs see the drive to provide that level of speed, because it's 200 is better than the 70 that most people are getting on, for example, BT Infinity or some of the other Openreach products. And Openreach is now rolling out more 200 megabits. So Virgin is now rolling out gigabit in certain areas, right? The lack of competition has largely stifled the speed increases that are possible with fibre. What the mobile drive is going to do, the 5G, it's going to be very interesting over the next few years to see how the wired networks respond to that, because they can theoretically go faster. but they haven't been doing. So it could really drive up the speeds that we get. Now, why does this matter? Well, as well as the reliability and stuff, you're going to see things like 8K becoming more predominant. We've got 4K at the moment. I don't know if you watched the World Cup, but if you watched on BBC iPlayer and you had a 4K TV, you could actually watch the World Cup in 4K, and it was stunning.
Right, okay.
It was stunningly good, but you could only watch it over the internet. You couldn't watch it over satellite over
Right.
there, right? And you could watch it on their iPlayer, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of stuff happening. So, ultimately, faster internet connections and more connectivity just allows us to do much more exciting things. With the rise of things like virtual reality and things like that starting to come, you're going to see more and more of that kind of thing. And I just think it's very exciting. Well, we managed to get through that episode just about.
Somehow.
It's really exciting to have you back. Hopefully this week we're going to be putting this out on YouTube as well.
Vlogcast.
Vodcast, yeah. It's like
Could
a
be a
podcast.
vlog, a video
Yeah,
blog.
it's like vlogging. Vlogging is like the video version of blogging, and vodcasting is the video version of podcasting.
It's like a vlogcast.
Well, a
Eh?
vlogcast is more like, that'd be like saying a blogcast. It wouldn't.
Video blogcast. Video blog podcast.
Or just a podcast. Well, hopefully that hasn't put anyone off from joining us next week. So look forward to seeing everyone then.
Goodbye.
See ya.